So, good afternoon and good morning and good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the first virtual IPI World Congress. This year, we are reimagining journalism with 2020 vision. This is IPI's 69th World Congress. So IPI has been around as a global network of editors, journalists, and publishers for a while. And over the decades, together with our community of members and partners, IPI has always been there to discuss independent journalism, to intervene whenever independent journalism is threatened. And over the years, the IPI World Congress has been the place where we discuss and exchange experiences on how to do our work better, how to do journalism better, how to remain independent, and how to serve our audiences, and sadly often also how to survive. At this year's IPI World Congress, we are not only discussing how to reimagine journalism, but we are also rethinking what a World Congress can be right now. So throughout this month, as you join different sessions, let us know what you think we get right, what we can improve. And we are excited about an amazing program we've put together, some very interesting speakers, and I hope you will find it interesting too. Just technically, please post your questions in the question and answer box and share your comments with the speakers or with the whole audience in the chat. My colleague, Jackie Park, whom you will see on camera toward the end of this session, will collect some of your questions and turn them over to the speakers in the second part of this conversation. So here is our first session, a one-on-one conversation between two people from two organizations that have already reimagined what media can do. Gary Liu, the CEO of the South China Morning Post, which is reimagining itself as the global information source about China, and Lauren Williams, editor-in-chief of VoxMedia, which is rethinking the value of journalism as context. So I'm pleased to hand over to you, Gary and Lauren, and enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and IPI for having us along. How you doing, Lauren?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We are complete opposite time zones right now, so I hope that you are awake, and I hope I stay awake over the course of the next hour or so. Yeah.
I have not had coffee yet, but I think I'm good.
Well, you know what? Without coffee, let's dive right into it, because you and I have about, let's call it 25 minutes or so to have a conversation amongst ourselves, and then hopefully we'll get some good questions in the Q&A box that we can jump into and answer. But I'm going to start off by kind of turning the topic that we're supposed to be talking about, which is how to reimagine journalism and create a sustainable business in today's world. But I'm going to turn it on its head and start with the opposite of that question, which is, what things in journalism do you think should never be reimagined? Are there things that should always remain the same? Maybe not always, but at the very least right now, should remain the same and sacrosanct and untouched?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the cornerstones of journalism, right? That the pursuit of truth, the holding of the powerful accountable, the uncovering of wrongs. Like, these are things that should never be reimagined, and some of them are things that are in danger when you start worrying about the business and trying to find new ways to sustain the business, such as, you know, maybe being a little too friendly to an advertiser, or in the case of the United States, maybe succumbing to pressure from a political party or a president to do a certain type of coverage, or even, you know, if you are a subscriber business, succumbing to the pressure of boycotts, or, you know, mass unsubscribe because people didn't like a story you did, despite that story being true and correct and an important, valuable news story. And so as we're thinking about pushing the business into new places, we can't lose what the cornerstone of what we do is. And it's always in danger.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I would add a few things that now, a few additional things that border a little bit more on the nuance, where there might be some disagreement kind of in the gray. I would suggest that for news organizations, balance is really, it's still, in my opinion, sacrosanct. And I know that there are going to be others out there that disagree. I'll speak from the South China Morning Post point of view, that in a world of polarizing opinions, of alternative facts, that when we search for the truth, and certainly when we search for the perspectives that allow our readers to make up their own mind on what they not only want to believe, but the way that they want to shape their worldview, I think finding balance for a news organization is really important. And within that nuance as well, I do worry that with all the changes and all the evolution of how we go about collecting information and collecting data and all that, then all the new ways are very, very important for the new form of journalism that we have the privilege of doing. But in all those new ways, I'm scared that we're throwing away the fundamentals of how to get to the story, right? It's simple things like picking up a phone call, or picking up the phone and dialing someone and meeting somebody and going to primary source. Not making assumptions until you have heard effectively the entire account of a story of a situation. Those are things that I know that our newsroom has to train in sort of extra way, train young journalists, and that's something that we definitely hold on to again, as and should not be reimagined.
Yeah, the balance question is interesting. There is a conversation happening, and I think it's very specific to the United States, and specifically race in America. There's a conversation going on in journalism about what balance and objectivity have historically meant in American journalism, and how that idea has sort of created this perception in the industry that there is a neutral that is a white man, and that everything else sort of kind of like falls down on a side in some way, and that in order to be neutral you have to sort of lose your history or your cultural knowledge or your experiences being discriminated against, or the history that your ancestors came from. And that is sort of something that's at real tension right now in American journalism, what objectivity means, and has that the idea of what it has meant historically meant sort of undercovering or covering poorly communities of color. And I think the core idea of balance, of understanding all sides of a story before you're writing about it, that is a cornerstone. But I also think that there are parts of it that can be reimagined to be more inclusive, and to for journalists to be more open about what's happening in communities that they don't understand or they are not a part of. And I think that, so in a way, I think that there is something to reimagine there, but it's very nuanced and complicated.
No, I love that perspective, and I love that articulation, Lauren. I think that it's very, very interesting when we talk about balance and objectivity in news, that in the US, and we limit the conversation to just the US for now, you can personify what objectivity and balance has looked like historically. I imagine that if you really tried in many other places in the world, including where I'm coming from, which is Asia, and where, because of the, let's call it diversity of views, what I really mean is fractionalization. Because of that, balance is very, very important into us understanding the full picture at this moment in time. But if we tried hard enough, I imagine that we might be able to do the same thing. We might be able to personify what objectivity historically has looked like. and maybe question that assumption as well. But for now, at least our news organization is sticking to it because we believe it's important for us at this moment in time. And it is very, very interesting to observe what's happening in the United States and hopefully learn from the experience that the American press is going through right now.
Yeah.
Let's jump into things that are changing, that you and I both agree has to change, and thankfully for our two organizations has changed over the course of your entire, the reinvention of news for Vox, or because of Vox, and then for me, a reinvention of a very old news organization. I want to start with Vox because the story of Vox is so fascinating. Because in effect, Vox, along with some other digital-first, digital-only peers in the United States, completely reimagined what the product of journalism is. Now, I don't know if you can answer such a broad question as, what is the product of journalism now for Vox? But I'm going to throw it out there and see what you do with it.
I think I can pretty succinctly answer it. It's the explainer. Our product is the explainer. Our product is explanation. Our product is context. It looks different in a lot of different ways. It shows up in a lot of different platforms. But the general idea of Vox is that the news is not necessarily the most important part of the story. The thing that happened today that we're covering is often just a door to a big, wide world of context that is essential to understand this news that happened today. What the founders of Vox, Matt Iglesias, Melissa Bell, and Ezra Klein sought to do when they founded it was sort of turn that newspaper model of the latest thing that happened is the first thing that we want to tell people, and really help people to understand the news events. And really we think about what audiences deserve from us. They deserve an explanation. That doesn't always mean an answer, because there's not always this is the right thing or this is the wrong thing or this is exactly why this happened. But if we're covering the wildfires, we're not just going to cover say what burned. We're going to talk about what brought us here, and I think what brought us here is often as important as the fire itself. And regardless, there's tons of other local news and newspapers covering the fire itself. So what can we offer? And I think that the way that we like to think about our product is that it can coexist with any competitor, with the New York Times or the Washington Post, because what we provide is something a little different.
I mean, that's spectacularly unique, which I'm sure is a big reason why Vox has been so successful and really has reinvented the profession of journalism for so many. It's a little bit different for the Post, for the South China Morning Post. We didn't have the, I should say, luxury of blank page reinvention of the world that we exist in. We're a 116-year-old newspaper, and we have served Hong Kong, our home city, for that long. And there's a lot of legacy there that has remained for good reason, and some that has remained for convenience. For us, I think the reinvention of the journalism product over the course of the last few years is a recognition of a very specific value prop that we have for our audiences around the world. And that value prop can be explained in two parts. The first part is that we are a window into a closed information system. And that closed information system is, of course, China. It is just a spectacular position to be in, a very, very unique position for us as a news organization, because China is, and we've argued this for years, and I feel like at this point, we finally have started to convince a big swath of the world that China is going to be the biggest story of our lifetimes. The rising impact of this country, the way that it changes practically everything for good and for bad around the world. And because it is a closed information system, having a unique vantage point and the ability to extract information from the country and share it to the rest of the world is really what the journalism product is. The second part of it is that with that information, and a lot of it is new, a lot of it is unique, because there are very, very few people who have the access that we have. The second part of the product is that we have to provide a platform for intelligent discourse. And that platform should not just be experts talking at one another. It should be an opportunity for the world to learn from each other. And that's the hard thing to do, right? Because we all know what just throwing up a comment section on a news site is going to do. You're going to not get intelligent discourse. That is definitely not what it defaults to. So how do you leverage the access that we have because of the internet, this golden age of the news canvas that we have, and all the niche communities that we are able to build at scale because of digital distribution? How do we leverage all of that to create opportunities for intelligent discourse around the world? So those are the two things we're thinking about. How do we extract information from a closed information system and present it in a consumable way? And sometimes it does, become explainers for us as well. And we are learning a lot from Vox about how to do explanation well, and then how to provide the platform for conversation.
I think it's so interesting. Vox has been around for 6 years. I've been there for most of the 6 years. And I do think that we're kind of hitting a groove of and sometimes, for better or worse, sort of like getting set in our ways. And when you came to the South China Morning Post, how were you able to get in there and make stuff happen when there was already such a culture?
It's a great question. I was very, very lucky. And it's going to sound almost ironic, but I was lucky that the South China Morning Post had gone through a few really, really tough years. And the traditional business had already started to decline. And there was recognition across leadership and across most of the company that things needed to change. And so when I joined the company, I did not have to spend too much time convincing people of the need for change. And so I was able to dive right into diagnosing the problems and then assembling solutions. And because there were so many people ready for something new, ready to try something different, and they were willing to learn. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about being in this industry, because frankly, this job is the first time I've been in traditional media, surrounded by people who love to learn. The advantage of that is that they're just naturally curious. And with curiosity comes the courage of trying new things, of risking it all, because we believe that we have to survive. So I mean, that sounds a little bit too good to be true, but that is legitimately my experience. Now, it didn't make it easy. The process itself was not easy. And so changing mindset is one thing, changing behavior is something completely else. There's so many things, and it's muscle memory, right? So many things have been programmed into our organization systematically, as well as into the people who've been in the news industry for decades. Those take a lot of time to reprogram, to change the way that we think about data and why data should inform and can inform editorial decision-making. It does not dictate editorial decision-making by any means, but it should inform, right? Getting a news organization to get to that point of understanding or that point of recognition, boy, that's like pulling teeth. Understanding that the journalism product should in many ways be defined by what the user wants, not just what we as a news organization think we should be giving them. That was also really, really difficult. And I'm not sure that we've gotten either of them perfectly right yet. In fact, I can tell you that we haven't. We've made progress, but there's still a gap between where we really ought to be if we truly are thinking about this as a product company, as a user experience company, but also with news sensitivity versus where we are right now, which is still kind of straddling those two worlds of traditional journalism and digital. Did you guys have the same experience? Because it's not like if Vox just hired in a bunch of new thinkers, you guys hired in tenured journalists, which is why you guys are so good at what you're doing. Was that also a struggle?
It can be. I mean, I think it's interesting. Like some people come in and get it immediately. We've sometimes hired people from outside of journalism. We've had attorneys come work for us and learn journalism on the fly, but they have like sort of the context gene that they can bring, and they learn the journalism side of it. And but I think that thinking about serving audience is not something that's necessarily ingrained in this is not something they're thinking teaching you at journalism school or whatever. And I think that some can kind of scoff at that idea of like, what do they know? But particularly at Vox, if what we're doing is explaining and helping people to understand the world, we should know what they would like to understand and help them understand it. And sometimes it's surprising. Sometimes we know, and yes, the data does inform, and we learn over time that when X event happens, everyone's going to want to know X, and so we should explain X. But sometimes we're surprised, and we do the piece, and a bunch of people read it, and it helps them. It's a service, and that's what some of what we want to do. So,
yeah, and I feel like we're preaching to the choir here with
Right.
this being an IPI event. My guess is that all of the participants, everyone who's watching us at this conversation, understands that traditional newspapers always owned the entire stack. So we got to define, we being newspapers, got to define how to package the news and how to deliver it, and kind of everyone was stuck in that one experience. They had no choice, but now the world is filled with choice because of digital distribution, and so we do have to pay attention to choice. But the place where understanding what those stakeholders really need, or at the very least, I should say, the lack of understanding of what stakeholders really want, that the place where it's impacted, I think, news organizations in the most detrimental way has been the business model, right? Because in the past, we didn't really need to think. We were a monopolistic delivery channel for information. Anyone who wanted to participate in that had to participate in our way, and we got to kind of make up the rules for how to generate money through, for journalism, via journalism. But that's obviously completely changed. What has the Vox experience been in reinventing the business models around news?
Yeah, I mean, so our core is ad-based, and that's still the bulk of our business, but obviously that is changing drastically. It is not as reliable of a business model as it used to be, and particularly in this moment, which we'll get to later. But so we've really thought hard about how to diversify at Vox. And one of those is our studios business. Going into TV, we're on our third season of our Netflix show Explained. We have a new show on Quibi called Answered, a daily news show. We have a show with YouTube Originals. We have a couple of other ones that are coming that I can't say. So we are really taking this explainer model and finding ways outside of the traditional ad-based business to make money off of it. Additionally, we, even though this is ad-based, but not, website ads, but podcasts, it's a business that is growing instead of shrinking, even in this moment. And we have really leaned in on our audio business, from Today Explained, our daily news podcast, to That's Recline show, to The Weeds. It is another delivery mechanism for our explainers. And we're also, partnering with some foundations on grants to create, we created Future Perfect, which is our effective altruism vertical through a grant from Rockefeller. We've worked with the Pulitzer Center on creating big packages that otherwise we probably wouldn't have been able to create because they're expensive to do and not necessarily the sorts of things that advertisers are interested in. And then this year we launched a contribution program that has been really shockingly successful, and it is our first real foray into consumer revenue, and we're really excited about where that's going. So part of the way that we think about this is just being like incredibly open to opportunities. Not doing things that don't match our brand, but if it does match our brand, like, let's just try it and see. And the contribution program was pretty low stakes. We didn't make any hires to do it. We we didn't spend a lot of money making it happen, and now it's, we're realizing that it's going to be more of a real revenue driver for us, and we're thinking about how to invest in it. So we're just constantly thinking about the next sort of venue for the brand. And I think the great thing about our product is that it translates into so many different places. And that is, I think that's one of the real strengths of Vox is how mission driven it is, and how sort of clear and simple that mission is, and how you can put it in a bunch of different places. But how are you thinking about this?
I think exactly the same way, the idea to be open to opportunity. But I think that that last thing you said is really the key, is the fact that there's a very clear mission for Vox, and therefore it can translate. The brand of what it represents, the identity of its audience, can be represented through so many different mediums, so many different products. And when you can do that, you can create revenue opportunities that for sustainability. For us, the value proposition isn't explainers, but it is, again, that closed information system. That is what makes us unique. We are a specialist publication for the world on China, and increasingly so. That's that specialist audience is the entire world, is growing, right, every single day, every single week. And that being our mission, and we articulate our mission as to lead the global conversation about China, that is relevant everywhere. That is relevant in every medium. It's not just written word anymore. It is, as you say, in video, in audio. It is in conversation. It is in experience. It is in data. It is in evergreen knowledge, right? And so if we can express our expertise and our value to the world and through all of those information channels, then it opens up the opportunity to make money across all of those information channels. And I've always said that the biggest mistake that the news industry made was not getting to the internet late, because frankly, the New York Times had a website in 1994. The Saturday Morning Post had our first website in 1996. The mistake that we made was, for 20 years, we thought that all we needed to do was translate what was on a broadsheet onto an ever smaller, well, actually it was an ever bigger and bigger screen as the monitors were getting larger, and then immediately ever smaller screen as the phones were getting smaller. And we did that not only with the content and totally got it wrong, but we did that with advertising. We did that with monetization as well. And so we were taking the concept of print ads and replicating them on a digital space, and not realizing that the world was going to completely shift, because consumer behavior and the way that people discover what they want to buy and what they want to learn and what they want to do was going to completely change. And it kind of, the realization came a little bit too late. So we're trying to completely get away. No more translation of traditional onto digital. It's all about, just like this panel title is, all about reinvention. Mm-hmm. We only have a couple minutes left, but you alluded to the moment. What do you mean by the moment? What do you mean by what are the difficulties of the moment that you're experiencing?
Oh, this is, we would probably need another half hour to get into all the difficulties of this moment. I'm a parent of two, and they're in the house with me right now, and it's just a disaster. But yes, for the business, the pandemic has obviously, there's been a huge, advertising hit that is undeniable across the industry. Additionally, it's just sort of not having as much freedom of movement, not being able to talk to people in person, events being canceled, our reporters who go to Congress to report. It's shaken everything up in a way that's really tough. Even the TV business, a lot of the productions got halted. And this is one of the reasons we launched the contributions program in March, right after, in April, but we thought, we were thinking about doing it. But we launched it in kind of the middle of this because we realized that what we were providing, what we were providing was a service. And we realized that in this moment, people would want to support that service. People might more than ever understand the value of this service as the industry is struggling, and that turned out to be true. And it's a bright spot. And another bright spot has been that our video operation is not a field operation. And so once companies got wind of that, we were able to create some shows in quarantine. We did a COVID miniseries of Explained on Netflix. We launched our new Quibi show remotely during the pandemic, which is something that just a lot of other production companies just didn't have the skills to do. So that was a real mark in our favor. And another thing that's a struggle is that, here we are on Zoom instead of in person. The events business, which is something that was and is really important to VoxMedia, has just sort of gone away, and we don't know when it's coming back. And we can do remote events, and we are doing them, but it's not quite the same as doing a big, huge in-person code conference.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's unmoored us in all kinds of ways. Plus, it's you expect journalists to be sort of impassive and just do their work, but this is actually like pretty harrowing for everyone. And so we're like doing our work through struggling with our kids at home, and maybe having sick loved ones, and so it's been the toughest year for sure. How are you? How's it going over there?
Well, what's so unique about the situation is that for the first time, the world is kind of united in experience. And I'm not sure like when the last time we could say that was. Maybe going back all the way back to World War II. By the way, before I jump into my last bit, and before we go to questions, I was reminded to tell everyone, if you have questions for Lauren or myself, please do drop it in the Q&A box. We'll get to it in just a minute. We're experiencing everything, Lauren, that you just went through. I think most of our peers on this call are experiencing everything that you just talked about. I'm going to try my best to focus in on the optimistic side of it, which is that it really has forced change that we ourselves, doesn't matter how much we wanted to as executives, it would have been really, really difficult for us to force this level of change in this short amount of time. One example for us, because we've been a local newspaper for the majority of our existence, but now that we're a global news organization that is distributing all over the world, and 95% of our audience is actually outside of our home city, there was a massive misalignment of where our resources are, which is in Hong Kong, and where our audience is, which is everywhere else. And as we were reporting on China's impact around the world, we were finding that we were reporting on all these different parts of the world, oftentimes with just editorial base being in Hong Kong, some stringers everywhere else, but not knowing really how to hire and how to manage and how to really be able to sinew in an organization that was spread out from home base. But we really struggled with that. We actually, like many businesses going through this transition, we spread out a little bit, and then it didn't work, and then we retrenched. And COVID-19 has given us completely new confidence that we can do this, that we can be a distributed company. That there is still I'm somewhere in between the argument going on right now about whether or not the office still matters. I still do believe there's a purpose for being in presence with one another, but I also see the huge advantages of being an organization that creates autonomy to the point where we can be distributed and actually be more productive because of it. The Matt Mullenweg argument of sort of the autonomy pyramid. So that has been a huge positive. It has forced our organization to make that switch in a very short amount of time. I think we're going to benefit long-term from it. Now I see the screen, which is probably the signal that we should stop and jump to questions. So hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gary. Fascinating so far. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A box. So from Emre Kizilkaya in Turkey, he asks, out of all of the experiments that you've been running at Vox and South China Morning Post in the last couple of years, which was the biggest success and which was the biggest flop? And I guess, what are the lessons that you can share from that?
Lauren, you want to jump in?
Well, I've been doing a lot of talking about successes. So I'll talk about one that wasn't quite a success, but taught us a lot. And early on in Vox, and I think it might be different if we did it now, but early on in Vox's life, we had a Snapchat Discover channel, and it was it took a lot of investment and work. Our video team didn't create vertical videos. We had to it was a whole thing. We had to hire a team, and we really liked the content that we put up there, but it was, when I talk about making sure that Vox is translating everywhere we are, it was one place where it didn't quite translate in that moment. It didn't translate to the audience of Snapchat. The way that we were thinking about taking our articles and turning them into Snapchat stories didn't quite translate. And it ended up being kind of a diluted Vox product as opposed to something where we could really thrive. I think it taught us so much about the platforms that we pursue partnerships with, but also the way that we are strategic about the way that we present our content on different platforms. And I think it was an important lesson. And I actually, I wouldn't call it a flop, because I think it was actually pretty good, but I think it taught us a lot about how to be more strategic about the choices that we're making, and understanding when we have the bandwidth and the staffing to do a thing, and when we can basically should say, you know what, give us 2 years and we'll be there. And that's something that we have done more and more. And we don't always have to be, the first or even the second, but sometimes we can step back and figure out the best way to join a thing before we do it.
Yeah, for me, I'll be very quick for the South China Morning Post. I think one success, it really started off as an experiment, which is, okay, can we translate traditional news journalism to video? And I know a lot of people have done it, and we were so scared because everyone was talking about the failure of the pivot to video from several years back. But we really just believed that explaining China to the world required visuals, because one of the major misconceptions about China is what it's actually like, and most people don't get to visit or haven't visited. And so video we committed to as a medium for storytelling, and it has just taken off. Our thesis that seeing China allows you to fully understand and better understand China definitely played true, and it really has taken off for us. The mistake we made was assuming that if we had a targeted new audience and we had the data to tell us where that audience is and what they wanted, that we will be able to translate our value to that audience. Kind of what Lauren said, and for us, that has not been the case. You really, really, really have to be genuine about it.
Okay, great. Now, for me at least, one of the most fascinating parts of this conversation was when you were talking about culture and, bringing about that change, both in mindset and behaviour. And this question is from Jacob Granger in the UK. Gary, to both of you, are there any examples of new ideas or initiatives that you've introduced that have been met with pushback, either from above or below? And what did you do about that? How did you handle it?
The short answer is everything. These are news organizations that we run. They're defined by their skepticism, which is why news organizations are great at what they do. Almost everything. One of the great examples was we built, it's going to sound silly now because we're all stuck at home, but we built a brand new office a couple of years back. and consolidated our people from across Hong Kong into this beautiful new office that was designed, that purpose designed for what we deem to be this new type of journalism, and explaining to, you would assume that if you give employees a nice place to work, a place where they have the flexibility and the optionality of how they want to work, and all the facilities to create great storytelling, that you assume that everyone will be really, really happy about it, but that is not the case. And we spent so much time trying to explain why we as a company were spending the money, how it was going to translate to better work and growing audience, and therefore sustainability for the news industry or for our business. And it took a while, and there's still skeptics, and COVID-19 and being stuck at home does not help, right? Because that at least is hanging over our head at this point. I still believe in it, but those are, that's one of those things culturally that took a while. But when people got into it after living in it for a year and starting to see what it did for new space, did for collaboration and creativity, that's when people really, really started to understand. Lauren?
Yeah, I think one of the toughest things that I have learned as a leader is being super excited about some news, something I worked really hard to get for my team, or something that is a great opportunity for us, and getting in front of the staff and announcing it, and just seeing like grim faces and just getting a bunch of questions like, why are we doing this? What does that mean for me? Like Gary said, like these are people whose jobs are to be skeptical. And so while I don't have an exact example, I think the thing that I have learned is that, and it goes back to the mission of Vox, is that context is so key, and helping people feel like these decisions are super strategic, and giving them the insight into why we're doing it, and specifically how it matters or does not matter for their job or the future of the company, or all of these things, is so incredibly important. And it also, is a test for you. Like, whatever you're doing isn't capricious. Like, there is a reason for it. There's a good reason for it. And you should be able to communicate that reason very clearly to your staff and to your leader and to your managers.
Okay, so we really need to wrap up. So we've got just time for a couple more questions. One for Lauren from Orhan Sena, again from Turkey, the Journalism Academy and the Journalists Union of Turkey. And he wants your comments on the unionisation trend in digital media and what you've learned from the Vox experience. And for Gary, the question is that South China Morning Post has accelerated its paywall forward during the coronavirus pandemic. What was the thinking there, and what impact have you seen? So if I can just give each of you that one question to finish.
Yeah, I'll be really brief. I think when you look at digital media and the tough time digital media has had in the last 10 years, and a lot of the shifting business models, not necessarily at Vox, but across the space, and a lot of the layoffs, like, it's totally understandable and even smart that the unionization trend has taken on. And I think specifically at Vox Media, it's been a net positive and a force for good.
Right. Gary.
Yeah, where do I begin? I'll keep it relatively short. The acceleration of our digital subscription product, it was only accelerated by a couple of months. I want to be clear. This was always part of our plan. And we happened to be ready this year. So we were planning on doing it this year. We just moved faster because we needed a focus, and we needed new revenue channels, because traditional revenue channels were at risk. It's gone relatively well. We're only about a month or so into it. We know that this requires patience. What we've learned from it is that optimization through data is a discipline, and we can't expect, because we have high quality content, because a lot of people have told us in the past they're willing to pay, that we can just turn it on and for it to work. So we spend a lot of time really understanding the user experience, how to improve it, and really how to communicate that value that we have to readers. And that will continue into perpetuity. Jackie, you're muted.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, that was a really fabulous opening session. Thank you so much, Lauren and Gary, for that. You've certainly set a very high bar. So thanks everyone for joining us. We will reconvene at 4 p.m. Central European summertime. And with that, we'll be back with a panel including South Africa's Daily Maverick, Norway's Schibsted, and the Süddeutsche Zeitung, talking about, again, digital transition and the future's already happened, but what can we learn from that? And about really the moment each of them recognised that they had navigated their way into that future. Then straight after that, we have a big conversation with the New York Times outgoing CEO, Mark Thompson. So please join us back here in a little over an hour. And thanks. We're signing off for now. Thanks again, Lauren and Gary.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So good to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Terrific. Bye.